So we start with a new chapter, the challenges of cultural diversity. Now, a short recap. First of all, social institutions, say like the family, caste, or tribe, can have both positive and negative aspects. The positive aspects of the social institution are that they bring the people together, they create strong collective identities, and last, they strengthen social cohesion. Now, the negative aspect of the social institution is that they can be a source of inequality and exclusion. So, the question arises is that why is this diversity, this cultural diversity, a challenge? But before we delve into this, let's just define the term diversity. Diversity means that there are many different types of social groups and communities, and these communities are identified by the cultural markers, like, say, for example, different languages belonging to different religion, or the people belonging to different caste, race, or sect. So these all are called the cultural markers. One thing to note is that diversity emphasizes differences. It does not emphasize inequalities. Cultural diversity presents tough challenges. You might think, in what ways? Well, cultural diversity presents tough challenges as the cultural identities of these different groups are very powerful, and these can arouse intense passion over issues and mobilize a large number of people. Now remember, sometimes these cultural differences are accompanied by economic and social inequalities. And when trying to fix the problems of one community, the other communities feel that they have been sidelined. The situation becomes compounded when scarce resources are involved, say, for example, government jobs or funds, etc. When this happens, we have communal riots or caste wars or the fights for regional autonomy as the outcome. So, in this way, one community feels that they've been excluded or they are not at par with the other community, and this is the basis for diversity being transformed into a divisive force. Now let's look at the second subtopic, cultural communities and the nation state. So how is a cultural community formed? Well, by birth, we are socialized to live in a society. And who socializes us? Well, our family, our community. And this is done through a continuous dialogue. That is, we do not absorb everything, we negotiate, we challenge, we struggle against the significant others. The significant others, they might be our parents, family, our kin group, or community, and they provide us with the language and also the cultural values. So, this helps us understand the real world, and also this defines our identity. And this is our ascriptive identity. This gives us a sense of belonging, and this is not some accomplishment on our part, but somehow we become attached to this community identity. And as human beings, we are social animals, and every person feels a deep sense of security and satisfaction by being a member of a community. And also remember that one person or a single person is a member of many different communities, and this expanding and overlapping circle of community ties gives meaning to our world, helps us anchor our identity, and also helps us make sense of our social world. So because of this, we find that people, they often react emotionally or violently whenever they perceive a threat to their community identity. Also, these ascriptive identities are universal in nature. In a general sense, everyone has a motherland, a mother tongue, a family, or a faith. Conflicts arising due to these cultural identities are often very hard to deal with. Remember that in any conflict, both sides believe that they are in the right and that their struggle is for truth, justice, and equality. So they mobilize their members by highlighting their virtues and by exaggerating the other side's vices. Both sides believe that truth and God are with them. Well, at that point in time, both sides could be right or could be wrong. The real truth emerges after a long period of time when the conflict cools down. It takes years and years before one side accepts that it was in the wrong. Now, it is very rare that victors apologize for the wrong inflicted by them. For example, the Australian nation apologized to the descendants of the indigenous Australians, that is, the Aboriginals and the Torres Strait Islanders. With the apology came the pledge to stop the injustice and an assurance to help these people to overcome their disadvantage. Another example is that of the Japanese Prime Minister Mr. Koizumi's apology to the Asian nations for the tremendous damage and suffering caused by them during colonization and war. So the question arises, number one, what purpose do apologies serve? The actual victims and the actual perpetrators are long dead, so the victims cannot be either compensated or the wrongdoers cannot be punished. Now, one way of understanding this is that our community identities are very strong. We interact with others through this cultural marker. We also, as communities, have a moral compass and an understanding that after all, we are one world and one humanity. So, learning a lesson from the past wrong actions and committing to peace and prosperity of our present can only be affected through a closure. This is achieved by admitting the mistake and moving on to rectify it. The net result is the feeling of moral growth for that community. The second question that arises is, what purpose do war memorials and monuments achieve? Well, if you look at it, these serve as a marker of events important for that community and the acknowledgement of the sacrifices made by their community forefathers. So, if you look at it, our present to an extent is shaped by our past. Now, let's move on to the next subtopic, communities, nations, and nation states. First of all, let's define what a state is. We are going to take Weber's definition that state is a body that successfully claims a monopoly of legitimate force in a particular territory. Then let's define a nation. A nation can be viewed as a community or a group of communities that have their own state. Or you can see nation as a large scale community or a community of communities whose desire for political unity has been expressed through the formation of a state. It is somewhat hard to define a state in the sense that in the past one nation had many states or one state had many nations. For example, USSR governed people of 100 different nationalities. Similarly, more Jamaicans were living outside Jamaica than in Jamaica. That is, the population of non-resident Jamaicans exceeds that of resident Jamaicans. A different example is provided by dual citizenship laws. Now, what is dual citizenship? Well, when people can be at the same time citizens of two states and can serve in the armed forces of one country without losing citizenship of their own country. Example would be like the Jewish Americans, they may be citizens of Israel as well as the US. So, in today's time, the nation is the most accepted or proper justification for a state, while the people are the ultimate source of legitimacy of the nation. That is, one characteristic feature of the modern era is the establishment of democracy and nationalism as the dominant source of political legitimacy. Historically, states have tried to establish and strengthen their political legitimacy through nation building strategies. So, what are the nation building strategies they use? That is, through the policies of assimilation or integration. Let's look at what these words mean. Assimilation means removing the cultural difference between groups by often adopting policies of outright suppression of religion, language, or ethnic identity. Integration means that different communities are allowed to follow their cultural difference in the private domain, but in the public and political arena, there is the assertion of a single national identity. So, assimilation and integration are the two ways that the nation state treats the different kinds of communities, as most states have generally been suspicious of cultural diversity and have tried to reduce or eliminate it. We must be thinking, why so? Well, as nation formation is through community identification with it, this variety of community identity can prove to be dangerous rivals, and there's a perception that this diversity will be difficult to manage and control. That is why states generally favor a single homogeneous national identity. Now, note that suppressing cultural diversity can also prove to be a very wrong decision in terms of number one, alienation of the minority communities whose culture is treated as non national. Secondly, suppression can provoke the effect of intensifying that community's identity. Now, what's the solution? Well, allowing cultural diversity is a good policy from the practical and also moral point of view. Now we move on to cultural diversity and the Indian nation state. The Indian nation state is socially and culturally one of the most diverse countries of the world. India, with a population of 1.4 billion people, has about 1,632 different languages and dialects. As many as 22 languages have been officially recognized under the 8th schedule of the Indian Constitution, thus guaranteeing their legal status. Also, there are people of many different religions residing in India. That is, apart from the Hindus, there are Muslims, there are Christians, there are Sikhs, there are Buddhists and Jains. So you can understand that India has a very diverse community. And in terms of the nation state's relationship with the community identity, our country does not have the assimilationist or the integrationist policy. As per the Constitution, the Indian state is a secular state. The word secular was added to the preamble of the Indian Constitution in the year 1976 by the 42nd Amendment Act. It means that the citizens have complete freedom to follow and practice any religion. That is, there is no official religion for the Indian state. So, by international standards, we have a very strong constitutional protection offered to our religious minorities. That is, law wise, we are very strong, but implementation wise, we need to work upon it. So, the question arises is, what is India? Is she a state nation or is she a nation state? Well, the right answer is that India is a state nation where various ethnic, religious, linguistic identities can coexist peacefully in a single state polity. India is and has been a culturally diverse country. Through policies and institutional means, India is committed to the practice of pluralism and the resolution of conflicts through democratic ways. So, how is national unity achieved? Well, this is done by building up the loyalties of all the groups of the society through support, trust, and the identification with the state nation. Now, this is achieved through the recognition by the government of the cultural diversities and the framing of the policies that accept and recognize these differences. Thus, India is a multicultural, vibrant democracy that has constructively accommodated diversity for the sake of political stability and social harmony. Now let's look at regionalism in Indian context. We know that India is a multi-ethnic and multilingual country. That is, there is a great deal of diversity in India in terms of culture, language, religion, etc. Now the thing is that this diversity can be a cause of regionalism when there's a concentration of people of, say, a particular culture or a particular religion or a language in a particular area. So, regionalism is basically about increasing the political power and influence of a particular region based on these cultural identities. After independence, the states were reorganized on the linguistic basis. The States Reorganization Commission in 1956 approved the division of the states on the linguistic basis. So, the Indian ethno-national identity is based on language along with regional and tribal identity. It is not based on religion. Now, our institutional structures, that is the federal form of government, ensured that this very ethno-national identity was respected. How was this done? Well, by defining the powers of the state and the center and giving them areas of governance where they could individually or jointly operate. That is, I'm talking about the union list, the state list, and the concurrent list. So, this way, the regional deprivation sentiments got handled, and thus Indian unity has been strengthened by dividing the states on the basis of language, and our government through policies is working on reducing interregional and infrastructural inequalities. For a nation state, the most controversial aspects of cultural diversity are the issues related to number one, religious communities. Number two, religion-based identities. These issues can be broadly divided into two groups. The first group, secularism and communalism set, that is, states' relationship to religion and the political groupings that involve religion as their primary identity. And number two, minority majority set, that is, how the state is to treat the different religious ethnic communities that are unequal in number or power, whether we're talking about social, economic, or political power. Secularism in the Western context means that there's a separation of church and the state. That is, the state distances itself from religion. Now, in the Indian context, secularism denotes that the country does not favor any particular religion over the other. That is, it gives equal respect for all religions. For example, the Indian state declares public holidays to mark the festivals of all religion. So this is an example of the Indian secularism. When we talk about communalism, the English meaning of communal is something related to community or collectivity. The Indian or South Asian meaning is very different. Communalism here denotes an aggressive political ideology that is linked to religion, where it sees one's own group as the only legitimate group or superior group. So note that communalism is about politics. It is linked to religion, but it is not about religion. The communalists create an aggressive political identity and are prepared to condemn everyone who does not share their identity. Communalism is an important issue in India because it has been a recurrent source of tension and violence. Now let's look at the second set, that is the minority majority set. Now, when we're talking about minority in sociological sense, minority means that it is a small and relatively disadvantaged group. This also implies that this disadvantaged group forms a collectivity, that is, it has a strong sense of group solidarity. This intra-group loyalty is due to the shared experiences of prejudice and discrimination. So, religious or cultural minorities are politically vulnerable, irrespective of their social or economic position, and in that sense, they need special protection, which our Constitution has already provided them in the form of democratic and inclusive nationalism. Now, Article 29 and Article 30 is on minorities and cultural diversity. Note that every country in the world has minorities, and you will not find a country which has a homogeneous cultural group in their nation state. Thus, we see that regionalism in the context of the Indian democracy means an ideology that seeks the advancement of particular geographical regions that have a distinct cultural, language, or identity and tradition. You might be wondering, what is the difference between nationalism and regionalism? Well, nationalism means that there's this strong sense of loyalty to one's entire nation, while regionalism focuses on promoting the interests of a specific region within a nation. Now, regionalism is a cause of worry because, on one extreme end, it results in the separatism movements or the demand for full statehood or the demand for autonomy by that particular region. And what are the causes? Well, language, caste, and religion, and the expression of that particular group's identity and loyalty towards that region. So, we have looked at the negative aspect of religion, but there is also a positive side to regionalism in the sense that it promotes a feeling of joy in one's heritage and culture. So, there have been various regional movements that have brought into limelight this heritage and culture and have resulted in boosting the visibility of it through a focused approach. Now let's look at state and the civil society. We all know that state is an important institution and it manages the cultural diversity of a nation. How? Through its structure that consists of the legislature, the judiciary, the bureaucracy, the armed forces, etc. And these can, due to internal corruption, inefficiency, or lack of resources, turn authoritarian, which is the opposite of a democratic state. Then we have the non-state institutions that protect against the injustices of the state and keep a watch on the workings of the state coming into the picture. So, civil society is an aggregate of non-governmental organizations and institutions that involve diverse cultural, religious, and special interest groups that represent and implement the interests and will of citizens and enforce social norms. Note that they are not state controlled, and secondly, they are not purely commercial profit making organizations. Now, today, civil society organization takes up diverse issues such as tribal struggle for land rights, primary education reformation, devolution in urban governments, and the right to information. Civil society makes the state accountable to the nation and its people. Thus, we have come to understand how the state and the non-state institutions handle cultural diversity.